Hello, my name is Dr. Kirsty Hacking. I'm here representing these LTS lecturers as we reflect on MVLS PGT project supervision while on the learning, teaching and scholarship track, otherwise known as, but I don't have a research group. So the rationale behind this work is, as many of us are aware, there's been an increase in teaching-focused staff across the sector for the last decade or so, and this has been equated to improvements in teaching quality and student experience. And there's a growing body of literature around this. However, there's very little that is specifically on experiences of LTS staff who supervise postgraduate taught master's students in independent projects, specifically in fields such as the life sciences, where wet lab projects may be more typical. So there is potential for a different experience for supervisors and supervisees in contrast with an R&T staff provided project. So it should be noted that learning and teaching scholarship staff do not necessarily have contracted research time or consistent wet lab access or permanent research teaching or meeting space or links with an established research group. And that the scholarship research we are conducting is usually unsuitable for students to complete as part of their master's project because it does not fulfill discipline-specific learning outcomes for their program. So this work is very much reflecting on what is the postgraduate taught project supervision experience for medical, veterinary and life sciences LTS staff, and how might this affect our students' experience and learning. So we are all based in the College of MVLS, which is made up of 8 schools, and we provide projects through 5 of those schools. We have a mixture of prior experiences, including industry, postdocs, PhDs, and masters, and we're on a mixture of fixed-term and open-ended contracts. We provide projects that are individual or group projects, systematic review style, dry investigative, and wet lab. Should be noted that those wet lab projects are often based in teaching laboratories that have been kitted out for a summer project. We are, in this, both participants and we are scholars. So how did this work come about? Well, we had a meeting to discuss post-supervision resource sharing, because all of us had reactively created resources for our students. This might be how we utilize Teams in a structured fashion or guidance documents. However, in the course of that meeting, we identified challenges and complexities that were specific to LTS staff in our position, and that these themes emerged organically during this conversation. So 8 of these members of staff who were in the original meeting decided to take this further for scholarship, and we categorized those themes. For a more formal reflection, we created a shared document where we were able to expand on the reflections under each of these themes so that we could contribute to this in an asynchronous fashion to manage our workloads. And ultimately, once we had these reflections, we were able to identify shared challenges and complexities and contrasting experiences as well. So what did we find? Well, broadly, the supervisor experience we found fell into well-being, responsibility, project logistics, and career and future development. And these all very much had overlap with each other. At the core of this, of course, is our intentions to provide students with fulfilling and meaningful opportunities in the project. So these themes, these categories are all about our perceptions of the students' expectations and wants during the project. We recognize here we are not gathering student voice. We are basing our behaviors on the inferences that we make based on our interactions with students and what we have spoken to them about over multiple years of providing projects. So while we recognize we haven't gathered student voice yet, this is still impacting how we create a learning environment for this project students joining us. And ultimately, our working environment is their learning environment. So what is our perception of the student experience? Well, this comes from the motivations of why students do a master's relating to their future prospects and earning potential and employability, as well as desire to learn. And the understanding that the independent project is instrumental in their development, changing what would be a diploma into a master's ultimately. So we realized that there was a lot of variation in the sorts of projects we were providing in things like allocation. So some programs expect the staff to generate project titles and that students will either be allocated them or they will choose them, or they might be student generated. We have different project types, as well as the expectations from students around support structures that might be future prospects, future positions in a lab that we cannot provide, or academic and pastoral support, and esteem and future network. When those expectations are not met, there are potential student consequences, which may relate to lack of investment in the project, frustration, overwhelm, disengagement, and ultimately social isolation. Realizing that a lot of our reflections are around our expectations to manage or meet these perceived expectations. So, what is the supervisor experience? We had a lot of themes that emerged, don't have time to cover them all. However, we picked out those that we think were most novel or meaningful as part of this work to expand upon, one or more from each of these categories. So, under well-being, unsurprisingly, staff isolation was a recurrent theme. This has been identified in existing literature, and this, of course, affects staff resiliency and a possibility of things like burnout. People spoke about how their identity and how they conceptualize themselves and find meaning in our work, how this was impacted, and feelings around imposter syndrome. Of course, the pastoral support, where staff felt this was one of our strengths that we brought to the fore, but there were issues around negotiating boundaries and things like annual leave. And ultimately, it feeling like all of this is on our shoulders. We need to provide that community and support and create the nurturing space ourselves. And this is where well-being and responsibility link quite closely together, because that need to compensate also factors into things like the quality of the project that we're providing and the fact that there are no knowledgeable others in zones of proximal development, such as postdocs or PhD students, that these students can then rely on to help them with things like threshold concepts. There is only us to provide that, or in the case of group projects, potentially other master's students who are in the same position, but this varies depending on its individual or group project. Now, project generation, there's definite responsibility to produce a useful project for students. If we don't have existing research to piggyback on, or the data that we have from previous research is proprietary information, we can't necessarily use that, and there's little scope for us to generate further data or pilot studies because we don't have access to wet labs. So this can be a large challenge for us. And this can lead to feelings of vulnerability and concerns around job security, but ultimately there is the concern around staying credible with research-led teaching. The learning and teaching strategy for Glasgow University states that we are a research-rich environment with research-led teaching, and programs pride themselves on having research-active staff. The concern is the longer we are out of active research, the less credible we are for things like project supervision. And how do we keep up to date with that? Managing students, utilizing infrastructure where we may not necessarily have space to provide for students to work in. We don't have a lab for them to come to. And where we may have labs, we have a budget of about £1,000, which seems very generous, but it's not a lot when you're trying to kit out a lab that is not a research lab. We also had conflicting opinions on Teams, where Teams was either great or Teams was rubbish. So, in conclusion, without formal structures, academics can suffer from being siloed and isolated. And there's concerns around teaching-focused but research-led work and the longevity of our credibility. Staff perception of student expectations results in high workload and potentially different levels of expectation depending on program. And the process of allocation, student numbers may result in further difficulty around this. There is now an MVLS LTS network and a national network, and these might be good to be signposted to new LTS staff upon recruitment. As for future work, we want student voice. We want to know what are the expectations, how are they set, how are they met, and what are the experiences of supervision by LTS staff. We want to evaluate our current resources. Thank you so much for your time. Here are my references. Have a lovely day.